The moment I pulled a $5,000 electric bill from my mailbox, I realized my HOA had ignited a conflict with the wrong electrician. Allow me to set the scene. I'm in my driveway, the gravel crunching under my work boots, carrying the scent of sawdust and honest labor. My hands, the very ones that have wired nearly half the homes in this area, were shaking with fury as I stared at the paper that threatened to jeopardize my daughter's future. $5,000 for power in a home where I am meticulous about turning off every single light, because each dollar saved is a contribution to Sage's college fund. What these HOA opportunists failed to grasp was this. I have 3 decades of experience as an electrician. I can detect electrical fraud from a great distance. And when you attempt to swindle someone who knows precisely how electricity moves through every single wire in the vicinity, well, you've just supplied the blueprint for your own undoing. A bitter, metallic rage rose in my throat as the automated sprinklers across the street hissed on, paid for by our HOA dues while they were siphoning power right from beneath our feet. What would a person do if their HOA attempted to make them destitute overnight? Leave a comment if you have ever dreamed of overthrowing petty authoritarians, and let me know your location. I am Dalton Reed, and you could describe me as a traditional electrician. I'm actually a third-generation tradesman. My grandfather was my father's mentor, and my father was mine. I have been running electrical currents through walls since I was 16. However, this tale is not about wiring buildings. It's about wiring a path to justice. 3 years prior, I lost my wife, Sarah, in a vehicle collision that completely shattered my world. She was the type of person who could brighten any space simply by entering it. A sad irony, given that I'm the one with the expertise to actually wire lighting fixtures. The insurance payout was considerable, yet every single dollar felt tainted. Sarah had always expressed her wish for our daughter, Sage, to have all the opportunities she herself was denied. So, as I stood by her grave, inhaling the heavy aroma of funereal bouquets and newly turned earth, I vowed that our daughter would receive her education, regardless of the cost. This led us to Pinehurst Estates, a neighborhood so flawless it seemed digitally enhanced. You are familiar with the type. Lawns so perfectly trimmed you could use them for surgery, houses that shone as if cleaned daily, and an HOA that guaranteed the preservation of property values through community standards, which, in simple terms, meant we will police every aspect of your existence and bill you $180 per month for that honor. I purchased a modest ranch-style home, something that wouldn't provoke envy in the neighbors, but was clean, secure, and near excellent schools. It was the sort of environment where a 17-year-old girl could concentrate on calculus rather than worrying if her father was on the verge of collapse. Then came Cordelia Blackwood, HOA president and a career nuisance to everyone around her. Imagine every HOA horror story you have ever encountered, then give it a business degree and the charm of a parking ticket. She drove a white Lexus with a vanity license plate that read HOA Rain, and she genuinely believed it was witty. This woman had the nerve to check grass length with a physical ruler as if she were a cardiac surgeon. She wore ironed khaki pants to retrieve her mail and had a way of making "good morning" sound like a legal summons. Her residence was a sprawling colonial with a circular drive, and she acted as if the 846 other homeowners were merely tenants in her private dominion. For the initial few months, I adhered to the regulations, kept a low profile, tended to my property, and paid the monthly dues without protest. The sounds of children at play and the scent of backyard grilling made it seem as though we had discovered a new sense of normalcy. Then I made my first error. After learning of burglaries in the vicinity, I set up a straightforward security camera. It was nothing elaborate, just a device to ensure Sage's safety when I had to work late. Yet, Cordelia apparently saw this as an unauthorized exterior modification, subject to a $150 penalty. Upon reviewing our 847-page covenant document, yes, I did read the entire thing, as that is what conscientious homeowners do. I found that security devices were clearly permitted. Consequently, I walked over to Cordelia's residence like a sensible person in search of a rational conversation. Standing in her marble-floored foyer, hearing the click of her heels on the tiles like a countdown to my demise, I understood that reason was no longer present. "The board reserves the right of interpretation," she declared, her arms folded, glaring at me as if I had left a trail of motor oil on her pristine floor. That marked the start of what I now refer to as a slow campaign of attrition by paperwork. Each week presented new infractions. Grass exceeding the 3.0-inch limit at 3.2 inches, a mailbox painted the incorrect shade of black, matte instead of semi-gloss, it seemed. A garden hose visible from the road despite being neatly coiled next to my house. Each infraction carried a $150 fine, plus a $25 processing fee. My living expenses escalated from manageable to absurd, and I saw Sage's expression grow tense with anxiety each time a new envelope bearing the dreaded HOA emblem arrived. But I am getting ahead of my story, because the events that followed would escalate this situation from mere harassment to open conflict. The $5,000 electrical bill that altered everything. The letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning by a process server who seemed genuinely apologetic as he presented me with the substantial manila envelope. It was 6 a.m. on the dot, just as Sage was preparing for school, making scrambled eggs that filled our kitchen with the reassuring aroma of butter and normalcy. The timing was deliberate. Cease and desist was emblazoned across the top in bold red type, beneath the letterhead of Peton and Associates. I recalled reading that lawyers' letters are akin to high-end perfume. The more elaborate the presentation, the more it is attempting to conceal something foul. This one stank of desperation masked as authority. The ultimatum was clear. Settle the $5,247.83 electric bill within 10 days or be subjected to a property lien due to repeated covenant violations. They asserted that additional penalties were already mounting, like interest on a loan shark's advance. Through my kitchen window, I observed Cordelia at her own window 3 houses away, sipping coffee from a bone china cup, likely relishing every second of my seeming predicament. The morning light caught her look of satisfaction, and I could almost feel the metallic bitterness of her spiteful victory. What she was unaware of was that I had already begun to piece things together. Many years ago, during my apprenticeship with my father, he imparted a lesson that has stayed with me. Son, when someone alleges that your electrical work is the source of a problem, you don't debate, you investigate. Electricity follows the laws of physics, even when people break the laws of society. That piece of wisdom has guided me through 30 years of troubleshooting, and it was poised to guide me once more. So, I did what any sensible electrician would do when confronted with a questionable bill. I visited the county courthouse and began to examine public records. The musty scent of old papers and the sound of a pencil on paper brought back memories of researching building codes for challenging projects. My discovery caused my blood pressure to surge like an overloaded circuit. The HOA's electrical policy alteration had never been correctly filed. I had learned from a particularly contentious dispute with a contractor years earlier that any increase in fees necessitates 60 days written notice and the approval of a majority of homeowners. Emergency authority is restricted to genuine emergencies, not to cover someone's business expenditures. But this is where my electrician's intuition truly came into play. I obtained the clubhouse's electricity usage data for the previous year, and the figures practically shouted fraud more loudly than any siren. A 340% rise over 6 months for a structure that is used for monthly bingo games and the rare children's birthday celebration. It was time to request a favor. Jake Morales and I made it through trade school together 2 decades ago, forming a bond over subpar cafeteria coffee and the collective suffering of committing the National Electrical Code to memory. He has been a meter reader for the utility company ever since, and I had rewired his kitchen the previous Christmas as a gesture of gratitude for the numerous times he had assisted me in identifying enigmatic power problems. "There's something profoundly wrong with these figures, my friend," Jake murmured that evening, as we met in the Home Depot parking lot, where the smell of lumber and new possibilities always seemed to clarify my thoughts. That clubhouse meter is registering as if it's supplying power to a small factory, not a community hall. We made arrangements to convene that night for a more detailed examination. Midnight in a suburban setting has its own unique electrical symphony. The continuous hum of air conditioning units, the far-off buzz of street lamps, and the sporadic pop of a transformer adjusting to its nocturnal cycle. Jake and I neared the clubhouse like a pair of electrical investigators, equipped with flashlights and 3 decades of shared experience in identifying code infringements. The site behind the ornamental shrubbery would have sickened any reputable electrician. Someone had fashioned a crude, unlawful jumper cable system, circumventing the primary meter to supply power directly to an outside source. The craftsmanship was not merely subpar, it was hazardous, the type of amateur wiring that ignites house fires and results in fatalities. Worse still, the meter itself had been manipulated, artificially inflated to create the illusion that the clubhouse was consuming vast quantities of electricity. This is well into felony territory, Jake stated, capturing photographic evidence with hands that trembled slightly with rage. Someone is stealing electricity and forcing the entire neighborhood to foot the bill. I gazed at those unauthorized connections, feeling the pieces of the puzzle fall into place with a satisfying certainty. Cordelia's pottery enterprise. The industrial kiln I had caught a glimpse of through her garage windows. The questionable surge in shared utility expenses that commenced precisely when her online ceramics store started promoting handcrafted items fired in professional-grade kilns. My phone vibrated with a text message from an unidentified number. Pay up or lose your house. You have 9 days left. I looked at Jake and felt the first authentic smile in weeks form on my face. You know what? I believe she just provided me with the means for her own demise. Because this is something petty tyrants fail to comprehend. When you back someone into a corner who genuinely understands their craft, you don't encounter submission. You receive a masterclass in repercussions. And Cordelia Blackwood was on the verge of learning what occurs when you attempt to pilfer electricity from a person who has dedicated his life to ensuring power flows exactly as intended. The game was on. The assault arrived on Thursday morning, veiled as ordinary bureaucracy. I was in my workshop, inhaling the familiar blend of metal filings and electrical tape scent, when the doorbell rang with the insistent force of someone demanding prompt action. Through the peephole, I saw a city inspector clutching a clipboard like a protective shield, his expression that of a man who would prefer to be anywhere else. Randy Kowalski had been in code enforcement for 15 years, sufficient time to identify a premeditated setup. "I'm sorry about this, Mr. Reed," he mumbled, averting his gaze as beads of sweat formed on his brow despite the brisk morning air. "Received 3 separate complaints yesterday regarding commercial vehicle storage and unauthorized business activities." The timing was impeccable. Sage was seated at our kitchen table, her SAT prep materials spread out like strategic plans, when she overheard the official-sounding exchange at our front door. I observed her shoulders stiffen, her 17-year-old mind already assessing how this new development might threaten her college aspirations. 3 complaints, I inquired, although the strategic maneuver was clear. "Filed within an hour of one another," Randy affirmed, consulting his clipboard. "Cordelia Blackwood, Patricia Hendricks, and Robert Fitzpatrick." It was at that moment I knew Cordelia had made her first significant error. You see, when you have spent decades resolving electrical issues, you cultivate a keen sense of things that are inconsistent. I had rewired Patricia Hendricks's kitchen 18 months prior while she was in Florida attending to her terminally ill mother. And Bob Fitzpatrick, the poor fellow had been convalescing from hip surgery for 6 weeks, so heavily medicated that even signing his name was a feat, let alone completing HOA complaint forms. Yet, their signatures had somehow appeared on documents filed the previous day. As if cued by an unseen command, Cordelia materialized at my gate with the sort of flawless timing that suggested surveillance. She held her own clipboard, naturally, and wore the predatory grin of someone anticipating their trap to be sprung. "Inspector Kowalski," she projected, her voice laced with feigned worry. "I certainly trust you will be meticulous. We cannot permit commercial activities to undermine our residential character." Randy gave me a glance that conveyed he had witnessed this scenario before, and it rarely concluded favorably for anyone. However, regulations were regulations. So, we proceeded with the full tour of my garage workshop. What Randy discovered was precisely what any sensible individual would anticipate: a tidy, well-organized workspace with conventional residential electrical service. There was nothing unusual, nothing perilous, and certainly nothing commercial. My father had instilled in me the significance of a correctly configured workshop during my training, teaching me that 220-volt service, the same voltage used for electric dryers and air conditioners, was entirely legal and safe when installed correctly. "This is a standard residential configuration," Randy declared after examining my electrical connections. "Everything is properly grounded, compliant with code, and all permits are in order." I observed Cordelia's assurance waver like a fluorescent light on the verge of burning out. She had anticipated a clear-cut violation that would compel me to shut down my means of earning a living. Instead, she received a public lesson on the distinction between actual building codes and imagined HOA powers. But she had not yet played her final card. "What are the insurance consequences?" Cordelia inquired, a note of desperation entering her voice like dampness into faulty wiring. "Surely, business equipment invalidates residential insurance." That was, in fact, a clever point. Inaccurate, but clever. I had investigated this very issue when establishing my first workshop, as insurance companies, like electrical shorts, will exploit any pretext to create difficulties. However, home workshops for personal use are explicitly covered by standard homeowners policies, provided one is not conducting a full-scale manufacturing enterprise or handling hazardous substances. Randy calmly elucidated the legal facts while I watched Cordelia's expression progress through the 5 stages of bureaucratic denial. She had constructed this entire elaborate scheme, complete with forged signatures and synchronized timing, only to learn that adherence to actual laws tends to safeguard law-abiding individuals. "Mrs. Blackwood," Randy stated with the weary tolerance of someone who had clearly had dealings with her before, "unless Mr. Reed begins producing circuit breakers in there, his workshop is entirely lawful." After Randy departed with an unblemished inspection report, I remained in my workshop, contemplating patterns and indicators. In the field of electrical work, one learns to trace issues to their origin by systematically following the evidence. Each short circuit provides clues. Every overload has a root cause. Cordelia's desperation was becoming apparent. The falsified signatures, the meticulous monitoring of my activities, the progression from minor harassment to legal threats. She was behaving like someone with far more to conceal than pottery hobby expenditures. I took out my phone and dialed Jake. "Remember those meter readings? I need historical data for the past 2 years. Every reading, every irregularity, every dubious pattern. I'm finally prepared to escalate things." Jake's voice conveyed a mix of eagerness and professional intrigue. "Not escalate," I corrected, gazing at the electrical schematic I had been drafting while considering the evidence. "Surgical. Because if my assessment of Cordelia's activities is accurate, she isn't merely stealing electricity. She has been conducting a methodical fraud operation for years." It was time to shift from defense to dissecting the true problem, one connection at a time. The foreclosure documents were like a targeted missile aimed directly at my daughter's aspirations. I was assisting Sage with her interview practice in our kitchen, the atmosphere heavy with her anxious energy and the sharp scent of strong coffee, when the doorbell chimed with the distinct, forceful rhythm of official matters. Through the window, I saw a process server consulting his watch and our address twice, a deliberate timing that signaled an intent for maximum emotional effect. "Results of the emergency board meeting," he stated, thrusting legal documents into my hands as if they were toxic. "A property lien has been filed for cumulative violations amounting to $12,847. You have 48 hours to comply or foreclosure proceedings will commence." The color drained from Sage's face more swiftly than a blown fuse. Her most critical college interview was set to begin in precisely 8 minutes. A call from the admissions officer at State University to discuss her application to the engineering program. The timing was not a matter of chance. It was tactical. I quickly reviewed the papers while Sage shut herself in her room, attempting to project confidence and optimism about her future as her world was collapsing just outside her door. The emergency board meeting had supposedly taken place on Tuesday night, with Patricia Hendricks, Robert Fitzpatrick, and Cordelia Blackwood casting a unanimous vote to ruin our lives. This was the same Patricia who was still in Florida tending to her dying mother, and the same Robert who had been in a fog of post-surgery painkillers for 6 weeks, barely able to sign for his own medications, let alone HOA foreclosure papers. But Cordelia's desperation had made her careless. The list of violations cited unauthorized high-voltage industrial equipment creating neighborhood safety hazards, a reference to my 220-volt workshop. During my trade school days, it was ingrained in us that high voltage begins at 1,000 volts, which made my setup about as industrial as a standard clothes dryer. Any skilled attorney would dismiss this claim in court. More telling was the financial accounting. My initial violations, which amounted to perhaps $800 in arguable disputes, had somehow ballooned to nearly $13,000 through late charges, administrative fines, and emergency assessment fees. The calculations were worthy of a loan shark. While Sage concluded her interview with a display of forced positivity, I drove to the courthouse to conduct some traditional investigative work. The stale odor of archived papers and the steady scratching of researchers' pencils brought back memories of long nights poring over electrical codes. This time, however, I was investigating criminal activity instead of voltage requirements. What I unearthed made my hands tremble with fury. The emergency meeting had flouted every procedural rule on the books. State law requires 48 hours written notice for any meeting concerning property liens. The minutes of the meeting bore only Cordelia's signature, with the names of the other board members forged in a script suspiciously similar to her own. The same style of loops, the same pen pressure, the same distinctive flourishes I had observed on earlier documents. Yet the most startling revelation was hidden within the property records. Cordelia had filed a mechanic's lien, backed by falsified invoices for emergency electrical work on common areas. The work orders named contractors that did not exist and were dated for periods when I could verify no such repairs were made. Upon returning home, I found Sage in tears over her calculus textbook, her interview triumph dimmed by our precarious situation. The sight of my brilliant daughter's ambitions being jeopardized by one person's avarice solidified my determination like nothing else. It was then that Harold Morgan arrived at my house, carrying what amounted to our salvation in a manila folder. Harold and his deceased wife, Maria, were among the original members of Pinehurst Estates, from a time when the HOA genuinely supported homeowners rather than preying on them. For 15 years, Maria had meticulously documented every meeting, every financial dealing, and every policy revision, keeping the records in their climate-controlled study with the diligence of a professional archivist. "I found these after you spoke of the forged signatures," Harold explained, easing himself into a kitchen chair. "Maria recorded everything, and I do mean everything." The folder held our community's foundational papers, the initial HOA charter with bylaws that made Cordelia's recent conduct appear for what it was, entirely unlawful. The founders had established protections that necessitated majority homeowner consent for fee hikes, compulsory yearly audits, and strict constraints on emergency authority. As per Maria's detailed records, the last valid board election had taken place 3 years prior during a Christmas week meeting with only 12 residents present, well below the necessary 50% quorum. Cordelia's entire term as president was founded on illicit power. Every fine, every policy alteration, every emergency decree since that time was without legal standing. But there's more, Harold added with a grim sense of triumph, presenting bank statements that would make a federal prosecutor's mouth water. Maria managed to get copies of these before she died. The financial documents showed a pattern of systematic embezzlement over 4 years. Monthly payments from HOA funds to Blackwood Ceramics LLC were camouflaged as community expenditures. Pool services were billed but never rendered, landscaping projects were paid for but never carried out, and legal fees were charged for attorneys who were never retained. The total theft amounted to $127,000 in community funds, which were used to build Cordelia's pottery empire. Harold kept the most explosive evidence for last. Maria's final records, compiled just weeks before her fatal heart attack, contained photographs of unlawful electrical wiring connecting our clubhouse to Cordelia's home workshop. She had uncovered the tampered meter, the makeshift power lines, and the industrial kiln that was consuming electricity billed to 847 unsuspecting families. Maria intended to reveal everything at the upcoming board meeting, Harold said quietly, his voice heavy with sorrow and the sharp taste of unresolved matters. Then she passed away, and I was too distraught to see it through. But seeing what Cordelia is doing to your family, Maria would insist on justice. I looked at the evidence laid out on my kitchen table, like the components of an electrical diagram finally coming together. Forged papers, stolen funds, utility fraud, election irregularities. Cordelia had not just targeted one family. She had been running a criminal operation for years. My phone vibrated. Tick-tock. 47 hours left. I looked at Harold and felt a profound change within me, like a main circuit breaker finally settling into place after years of electrical issues. You know, Harold? She's absolutely right. In 47 hours, someone is definitely going to lose everything they've stolen. It was time to switch from defense to conducting justice. The decisive evidence was concealed in a shoebox beneath Maria Morgan's bed, encased in tissue paper like a cherished family keepsake. Harold had phoned me at midnight, his voice quivering with both the shock of discovery and a barely restrained fury. You have to come see this now. Maria left behind something that alters the entire situation. I discovered him in his kitchen, amidst documents laid out on every available surface, resembling the scene of a federal inquiry. The air was thick with the scent of old coffee and aged paper, blended with the sharp aroma of justice finally being attainable. I was unable to sleep, Harold stated, his hands shaking as he poured coffee that neither of us desired. I kept reflecting on your words about patterns and electrical fraud. So, I went through Maria's possessions once more. This time, I truly examined them, not just with grief. What he had unearthed would have brought tears of elation to a federal prosecutor. Maria had not only been archiving HOA documents, Harold went on, producing a leather-bound ledger labeled Insurance Investigation, Confidential. She was constructing a criminal case. The ledger chronicled Maria's clandestine activities as an amateur investigator. For 2 years leading up to her death, she had been methodically gathering evidence of what she believed to be widespread fraud within our HOA. There were bank statements she had acquired through her access as treasurer, photographs captured during early morning surveillance, and copies of utility bills that revealed impossible usage figures. But the ultimate prize was a manila envelope inscribed with "Smoking Gun," open only if something happens to me. Within it was evidence that sent a chill down my electrician's spine. Cordelia's HOA presidency was not merely invalid. It was entirely a sham. The election that supposedly granted her authority had never taken place. The Christmas week meeting where 12 individuals were said to have voted? Maria had verified it. The community center was shut down for the entire week for maintenance. She has been fabricating everything for 3 years, I remarked, the pieces falling into place like a flawlessly wired circuit. Board meetings, election outcomes, financial authorizations, all of it was a work of fiction. Harold gave a somber nod. Every fine she has levied, every policy she has implemented, every foreclosure threat, none of it holds any legal weight. We have been residing under a completely fraudulent regime. Yet Maria's investigation had brought something even more alarming to light. The theft of electricity was not confined to Cordelia's pottery business. She had been systematically pilfering power from various sources throughout the neighborhood, exploiting her fabricated HOA authority to conceal infrastructure that rerouted electricity from street lamps, swimming pool equipment, and even the emergency fire systems. Examine these figures, Harold said, pointing to Maria's precise calculations. 6 years of theft, 847 families overbilled. The total fraud is close to $300,000 when you factor in the embezzlement. The extent of it was staggering. Cordelia had not simply been operating a pottery business with stolen power. She had been running a criminal operation that affected every family in our community. Every inflated electric bill, every unexplained maintenance charge, every emergency fee had been a component of a sophisticated money laundering operation. There is more, Harold stated, his voice sinking to a murmur. Maria believed she was not the first to uncover the fraud. He presented a collection of newspaper articles Maria had saved about the mysterious deaths and abrupt departures of former HOA board members. 3 previous treasurers had passed away from heart attacks over the last 10 years. 2 board members who had raised questions about financial discrepancies had left town unexpectedly following family crises. Maria thought she would be next, Harold explained, indicating her final entry, which was dated the day before her heart attack. She had confronted Cordelia in private, threatening to bring everything to light. She died that night. The unspoken suggestion filled the room like the smoke from burning wires. Whether Maria's death was from natural causes or not, Its timing had preserved Cordelia's criminal empire and subjected our community to years of ongoing fraud. "Why are you revealing this to me now?" I inquired, although I already knew the answer. "Because Cordelia is attempting to do to your family what she has done to everyone who posed a threat to her," Harold stated, his eyes steely with resolve. "Silence them, ruin their reputation, or force them to leave." But this time, she chose the wrong person to target. I gazed at Maria's evidence spread across Harold's kitchen table and felt a fundamental change within myself. This was no longer just about my electric bill. It wasn't even about preserving my home or securing Sage's future. This was about obtaining justice for every family Cordelia had wronged, every neighbor she had silenced, and every individual who had endured her reign of organized crime. "Harold," I said, gathering the papers with unwavering hands, "we are not merely going to expose Cordelia's fraud. We are going to ensure she is held accountable in federal court for every crime she has committed against this community." The victim had just become the prosecutor, and the proceedings were about to commence. My workshop had the scent of a revolution. Coffee grounds blended with the adhesive smell of electrical tape and the sharp aroma of justice finally being attainable. Harold came at sunrise with Maria's investigative files and banker's boxes that appeared to have survived a conflict. Sage converted my workbench into a command center, her laptop humming as she created spreadsheets that cross-referenced fraudulent activities with the accuracy of a high-end timepiece. The familiar scent of brewing coffee mixed with years of workshop memories as we set out to take apart Cordelia's criminal operation, one connection at a time. "All right, team," I declared, drawing on 30 years of experience in resolving complex electrical issues. "We will handle this as if we are rewiring a house that has been poorly done by amateurs, methodical, detailed, and completely sound." Mrs. Martinez became part of our group on Tuesday evening, and her paralegal expertise was more precious than a fully equipped service vehicle. She systematized the evidence with the skill of someone who had spent her career making attorneys appear capable, arranging Maria's findings into categories that would make federal prosecutors overjoyed. "Four pillars of prosecution," Martinez articulated, her voice imbued with the confidence of someone who has witnessed justice postponed but never thwarted. "Financial fraud, utility theft, election irregularities, and racketeering conspiracy. Each element reinforces the others, and any single one could result in Cordelia's imprisonment for many years." The financial offenses were Maria's crowning achievement. Bank records showing $127,000 in systematic embezzlement camouflaged as community expenditures, pottery business tools acquired with HOA money, and vacations billed as board retreat costs. The documentation was so blatant, it was almost an affront to our collective intellect. "Here is something that will give you pause," Martinez remarked, presenting federal sentencing regulations. Mail fraud is punishable by 20 years per offense, and Cordelia dispatched fraudulent invoices via the Postal Service for 4 years. That could amount to 80 counts of federal offenses. My own electrical inquiry uncovered the full extent of Cordelia's thievery. Jake Morales had furnished meter readings from the past 6 years, revealing consumption figures that defied the fundamental principles of physics. Cordelia's pottery kilns were using power at an industrial scale, while her neighbors were being billed at residential rates for electricity they never consumed. Most people are unaware that high-temperature ceramic kilns use as much electricity as small manufacturing plants. I elaborated, sketching out load calculations that would have garnered praise from my old trade school teachers. Operating multiple kilns continuously necessitates industrial-grade electrical service, the kind that is 10 times more expensive than residential rates and requires specific permits. Sage's digital investigation brought Cordelia's online business to light. Blackwood Ceramics promoted its professional-grade equipment and industrial firing capabilities, all while bringing in over $200,000 in revenue. Customer testimonials lauded the consistently perfect glazing, a quality achievable only with premium commercial kilns. "Dad, you have to see this," Sage exclaimed, showing me Instagram posts from pleased customers. She's been advertising studio tours, showcasing equipment that costs more than what most people pay for their cars. All of it acquired with stolen funds and powered by stolen electricity. The election fraud was almost laughably obvious. Harold had secured official documents that confirmed the Christmas week election was a complete fiction. The community center had been closed for maintenance, and the voting records contained signatures from individuals who had relocated months before. Some signatures even belonged to residents who were deceased. Democracy perishes in obscurity, Harold observed, scrutinizing the forged signatures with my workshop's magnifying glass. But Maria documented every falsehood, every fraudulent act, every breach of community trust. Our planning sessions grew more intricate each day. Mrs. Hendricks provided financial documents from her short, legitimate period as treasurer. Jake delivered utility company fraud reports that would prompt an automatic federal inquiry. Martinez looked up legal precedents where comparable HOA fraud led to lengthy prison terms. I came to the realization, as I surveyed the evidence that covered every surface of my workshop, we are not simply constructing a case. We are assembling a federal prosecution that could serve as a prime example of how to take down organized crime that is disguised as community leadership. The plan took shape around offering Cordelia a final ultimatum, a public confrontation at the upcoming community meeting, with legitimate authorities on hand as observers. She could either confess openly, provide complete restitution, and submit to community justice, or she could deny responsibility and confront federal prosecutors who were equipped with evidence that could utterly ruin her life. Why extend any leniency to someone who has shown none? Sage inquired, her 17-year-old's view of justice clashing with the complexities of the adult world. Because at times, the most severe form of punishment is having to live with the repercussions of one's actions, I responded, recalling my father's teachings on both electrical safety and basic human decency. Incarceration would take Cordelia out of our community. Public humiliation and financial ruin while she remains here. That is a form of justice that benefits the victims. Martinez gave a nod of professional agreement. Federal prosecutors favor cases that provide compensation to victims over costly imprisonment. Restoring the community is always preferable to destroying an individual. By Friday evening, our body of evidence could have secured convictions for a dozen offenders, financial records covering 4 years, utility fraud impacting 847 families, election irregularities that would make authoritarian states seem legitimate, and witness statements from 17 families who had been methodically intimidated. 1 week from tonight, I declared to our assembled group, Cordelia Blackwood will learn what happens when criminals have nowhere left to turn. The student had become the master, and the lesson was about to commence. Cordelia's desperation was palpable on Monday morning, carrying the scent of costly perfume mingled with the sharp odor of sheer terror. The legal envelope was so substantial it could have served as a shield, adorned with the letterheads of 3 separate law firms. It appeared she had been seeking legal counsel with the urgency of someone searching for a physician to prescribe addictive drugs. The cease and desist order within was worded as if by someone whose legal education came from television courtrooms, ordering me to promptly halt all harassment, surveillance, and defamatory activities. I was perusing this piece of legal absurdity in my workshop, enveloped by the reassuring smell of metal filings and honest labor, when Sage burst in, laptop in hand, her face beaming as if she had just unearthed a hidden fortune. "Dad, Cordelia is having a major social media crisis," Sage declared, displaying Facebook posts that chronicled a real-time mental collapse. "She's been publishing frantic, paranoid posts every hour since midnight, and it's quite a spectacle." The posts were a textbook case of self-sabotage. Cordelia was simultaneously asserting that she was the target of a conspiracy while inadvertently confessing to operating an unlicensed pottery business. She refuted any financial misconduct within the HOA, yet boasted about her professional ceramic studio and industrial-grade machinery. The woman was, in effect, supplying evidence for our federal case while professing her innocence. "Hold on, it gets even better," Sage added, her youthful delight in observing adult folly blending with the contentment of impending justice. She has been sending private messages to other residents, attempting to rally support. Just look at the replies. Mrs. Patterson's response was incisively brutal. "Cordelia, you defrauded me of $3,000 through fabricated violation fines. Do not contact me again, or I will seek a restraining order." The Hendricks family was even more blunt. We are aware that you forged our signatures. You can expect to hear from our lawyer. Tuesday evening saw Cordelia's most desperate move yet. Harold Morgan phoned during our meal, his voice shaking with astonishment and the type of fury that arises from a personal affront by criminal foolishness. She attempted to bribe me, Harold declared, dispensing with any formalities. She came to my house with an envelope of cash, offering 10,000. Why? 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 10,000 Formido Jetradov Maria. Sold documents. Thymagif Cordelia at Harold. Front door with Bribbery Fund Swazel Mosto fitting. During my apprenticeship, I had learned that when individuals resorto throwing money at electricaliches instead of addressing underlying wiring problems. You know they are both disparate and dangerous. 5,700 in cash, Harold went on, his voice filled with contempt. It still smelled of the bank wrapper. Her hands were shaking so much she could hardly keep hold of the envelope. When I turned her down, she actually had the audacity to say, "Consider what is best for the community, Harold." Wednesday provided proof that Cordelia had abandoned all semblance of logical reasoning. She had engaged a private investigator who seemed to have been trained at a farcical detective school. The man had been polling our neighborhood, posing questions such as, "Have you observed any unusual electrical occurrences at the Reed residence? And does Mr. Morgan appear to be mentally unstable since the tragic loss of his wife?" The investigation backfired with the force of a major electrical failure. Rather than unearthing any compromising information about our group, the investigator inadvertently fostered a neighborhood-wide support system. Families who had been enduring Cordelia's harassment in silence began to share their experiences and realized they were not alone. Mrs. Rodriguez disclosed that she had paid $4,000 in baseless landscaping violation fines to avoid a confrontation. The Thompson family confessed to paying $2,800 in fraudulent architectural compliance fees. Even newer residents recounted tales of menacing welcome packages laden with violation notices and immediate fine demands. She has inadvertently rallied the entire neighborhood against her, Martinez noted during our Thursday planning session. Her paralegal experience enabling her to spot criminal behavior patterns that would excite any prosecutor. Nothing fosters community cohesion like the shared discovery of being methodically victimized by the same sociopath. Friday morning brought Cordelia's most direct assault to date. I found the tires on my work truck had been slashed with meticulous care, the deep gashes indicating personal animosity rather than a random act of vandalism. The sharp odor of ruined rubber combined with the morning mist served as a stark olfactory warning that desperate criminals turn to violence when legal threats prove ineffective. My security cameras, the very ones Cordelia had attempted to have me take down months earlier, recorded the entire event in high resolution. The video showed her approaching at 3 a.m. with a utility knife, glancing about anxiously before methodically puncturing each tire. Her face was distinctly visible, her actions were intentional, and her criminal motive was clear for any jury to see. "She has completely detached from reality," Sage commented, observing the security footage with a sense of morbid fascination. "Look at her face. That is no longer calculated intimidation. It's pure fury mixed with a psychological breakdown." The tire slashing demonstrated that she had forsaken all pretense of civility and resorted to criminal retaliation. More significantly, it elevated misdemeanor harassment to felony destruction of property, adding years to any potential prison term. Jake Morales validated our suspicions when he phoned with information from the utility company that confirmed Cordelia's total loss of connection with reality. She has been calling our fraud department daily, insisting on an immediate probe into your electrical work. She alleges that you are manipulating neighborhood meters and stealing electricity. The irony was so exquisite it could have been displayed in a gallery. While engaged in extensive utility fraud herself, Cordelia was accusing me of the very crimes she was committing. The utility company's investigative team was now formally engaged, setting off standard federal notification procedures. Saturday brought Cordelia's ultimate move, a mass email to all 847 residents asserting that I was a direct threat to the community's safety. The message contained fabricated quotes from neighbors and suggested that my electrical work had been the cause of mysterious power failures. The community's reaction was swift and overwhelming. Dozens of residents used Reply All, defending my integrity and recounting their own harrowing experiences with Cordelia. The email exchange evolved into a public platform for chronicling years of methodical mistreatment. She has just established a written archive of community-wide criminal victimization, Martinez remarked with a lawyer's admiration. Federal prosecutors will leverage this email chain as proof that her illicit activities impacted hundreds of families over several years. By Sunday evening, Cordelia had managed to commit federal bribery, felony property damage, criminal harassment, and mass defamation, all while we were constructing cases against her for her initial offenses. She had devolved from a shrewd criminal mastermind to a desperate amateur, generating evidence that would seal her own fate. 6 days until the community meeting, I informed our team, sensing justice drawing near like a properly flowing electrical current. Cordelia Blackwood is about to learn what happens when criminals have no more places to conceal themselves. The reckoning was imminent, and she had engineered her own undoing. The scent of intense panic, blended with costly legal cologne, filled my workshop on Tuesday morning as Harold burst in, clutching documents that resembled a white flag of surrender. "She's taken the ultimate step," Harold exclaimed, still trying to regain his breath after sprinting 3 blocks. Cordelia declared bankruptcy yesterday, asserting that she is being unjustly targeted by resentful neighbors and is confronted with overwhelming legal expenses. I was in the process of checking the voltage on a circuit breaker when the information struck. The steady hum of electrical machinery was suddenly overwhelmed by the thunderous roar of justice moving faster than anyone could have foreseen. The sharp smell of overheating electrical parts seemed to parallel the figurative burning of Cordelia's world as it crumbled in real time. "An emergency Chapter 7 filing," Harold went on, laying out legal papers on my workbench like exhibits from a crime scene. "She alleges temporary financial distress while categorizing her pottery business as a minor source of extra income and her household belongings as minimal residential assets." Sage glanced up from tracking Cordelia's social media collapse, her teenage expression aglow with the kind of contentment that arises from witnessing adults self-destruct through their own foolishness. "Dad." She actually posted pictures of herself at the bankruptcy lawyer's office with the caption, "Finally taking a stand against neighborhood bullies." The irony was so profound you could have integrated it into the power grid. Cordelia was portraying herself as the victim while exploiting federal bankruptcy statutes to protect assets she had pilfered from the very neighbors she was maligning. However, declaring bankruptcy while being investigated for criminal activity turned out to be Cordelia's most stunning error in judgment yet. Martinez phoned within a few hours, her paralegal's voice resonating with a professional zeal that reminded me of finely calibrated electrical machinery reaching its peak performance. Federal bankruptcy trustees are mandated to scrutinize all asset transfers and income streams within 4 years of a filing. Cordelia has just initiated an automatic forensic examination of every offense we have recorded. The bankruptcy petition was essentially a confession penned by someone who had never heard of the right to remain silent. She had declared Blackwood Ceramics LLC as a source of occasional supplemental income from residential hobby activities, a statement that directly refuted years of denying any commercial involvement. The document portrayed her pottery studio as a modest home-based craft area, yet photographs revealed industrial kilns that used more electricity than small factories. "She is literally furnishing prosecutors with signed admissions of guilt," I observed, examining papers that detailed every transgression we had been looking into: commercial enterprise, zoning infractions, undisclosed income, tax evasion. She was confessing to federal offenses while simultaneously claiming indigence. Wednesday brought the media frenzy that elevated our local conflict into a regional spectacle. Channel 7 News correspondent Jennifer Walsh had learned of the bankruptcy filing and linked it to our HOA fraud inquiry. Her evening broadcast, "Bankrupt HOA Tyrant Accused of Widespread Theft," included interviews with wronged families and video of Cordelia's industrial-scale pottery operation. Cordelia's reaction to the media coverage showed that her grasp on reality had frayed like worn-out electrical wiring. She agreed to a live television interview, casting herself as a triumphant female entrepreneur being ruined by envious neighbors. The interview featured a tour of her garage workshop, where she proudly showed off equipment that clearly contravened every residential zoning regulation in the state. She is constructing the case for the prosecution herself, Sage noted with wonder, documenting every self-incriminating remark. Those kills consume more power than our entire house. She is effectively broadcasting evidence of utility fraud to thousands of people. Thursday brought news that federal agencies had taken an interest in our small-town justice initiative. Jake phoned with information that made my electrician's heart race like a perfectly balanced motor. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had reached out to the utility company's fraud investigators after Cordelia's bankruptcy filing prompted routine criminal background screenings. When an individual claims poverty while under investigation for massive theft, federal prosecutors presume a flight risk, Jake clarified, his voice filled with the excitement of someone witnessing justice finally engage at full throttle. They are fast-tracking the investigation to prevent the hiding of assets and potential escape. The federal scrutiny was clearly impairing what was left of Cordelia's reasoning. Harold described late-night sightings of rental trucks at her residence, likely an attempt to move pottery equipment before the authorities could confiscate assets bought with illicit funds. Our neighborhood surveillance cameras, the very ones she had tried to have banned months before, recorded every frantic move she made to hide her assets. Friday saw Cordelia's most irrational move yet. She called a community safety meeting at the local library to discuss the ongoing harassment from dangerous neighborhood elements. She had apparently deluded herself into thinking that public sentiment could supersede a federal criminal inquiry. The meeting unintentionally became a victim impact statement session. While 3 residents came to support Cordelia, 22 families showed up with documents detailing her methodical fraud. The library staff unwittingly became witnesses to accounts of embezzlement, utility theft, election fraud, and years of criminal intimidation. She has organized her own victims to deliver statements for the federal prosecutors, Martinez noted, her legal admiration verging on amazement. Most criminals attempt to avoid generating evidence. Cordelia is actively producing it. Saturday brought confirmation that Cordelia's desperate actions had expedited rather than averted her downfall. Her bankruptcy lawyer had resigned upon learning the extent of the criminal liability she had failed to disclose. Utility company fraud investigators had submitted official complaints to the FBI and the state attorney general. 2 mortgage lenders had initiated foreclosure proceedings on properties she had used as security for undeclared loans. But Cordelia's ultimate blunder occurred on Sunday evening, in the form of a mass email that would have made a confessional priest weep with recognition. She declared her temporary relocation due to community persecution, while vowing to return and reclaim everything that was stolen from me. The message inadvertently admitted to fleeing the jurisdiction while also threatening to commit further crimes upon her return. Federal prosecutors would interpret this as classic evidence of criminal intent and a consciousness of guilt. She has drafted her own indictment, I remarked, making copies for our evidence files. Asset concealment, flight risk, threats of future offenses. Prosecutors could not create more compelling proof of criminal conduct. Monday morning confirmed that justice was nearing with the certainty of an electrical current taking the path of least resistance. The federal bankruptcy trustee had frozen all of Cordelia's assets. The FBI had initiated a formal criminal investigation. State authorities were getting ready to file charges for election fraud. Tomorrow night, I declared to our team, feeling the immense satisfaction of a complex electrical issue finally being resolved, Cordelia Blackwood will be faced with her last choice: a public confession and community restitution, or federal prison and total ruin. The current was flowing, and justice was about to illuminate the entire neighborhood. The community center was charged with an energy that had no connection to the fluorescent lights buzzing above. 274 residents were packed in, shoulder to shoulder, as 3 television crews recorded what was to become the most contentious HOA meeting in the nation's history. I got there early, taking in the heady mix of excitement, nervous perspiration, and the faint smell of institutional coffee that permeates spaces on the verge of democratic renewal. My binder of evidence felt more substantial than a fully stocked tool belt, containing everything necessary to complete the most significant task of my life: rewiring an entire community's belief in justice. The media frenzy was in full force. Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 held a prime spot in the front row with professional-grade lighting. Major regional newspapers had sent their top investigative journalists. Most significantly, a federal prosecutor was seated in a rear corner, his presence elevating our local gathering to something akin to a criminal hearing. Cordelia's arrival was a spectacle in itself. A designer black suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, accompanied by a lawyer who kept glancing at his phone as if awaiting an evacuation signal from a failing vessel. She scanned the crowded room with the desperate assurance of someone who still thought she could manipulate a story that had already spun out of her control. Before we proceed, City Council member Roberts announced, his voice reflecting years of experience with genuine democratic procedures. I wish to state that federal and state officials are present at tonight's meeting. All statements made here are being recorded for potential legal purposes. Cordelia's complexion turned ashen as a winter morning, yet she squared her shoulders like a person bracing for a fight she knew she could not win but would not concede. Mrs. Martinez was the first to approach the microphone, her paralegal expertise clear in every meticulously arranged paper. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to present evidence of 4 years of systematic financial crimes committed against this community. The overhead projector showed bank statements that revealed a story of astounding theft. $127,000 embezzled through fraudulent expenses, pottery business equipment bought with HOA money, and vacation cruises billed as board retreats. Each transaction was documented with the accuracy that would be a dream for any criminal prosecutor. Every resident in this room has been methodically defrauded by someone they entrusted with community leadership, Martinez declared, her voice resonating through the silent hall like an electrical current through well-grounded wires. Cordelia's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she kept her gaze fixed ahead, her expression frozen like someone witnessing their empire collapse in high definition. Harold Morgan then presented the evidence of election fraud, his voice fortified by 3 years of suppressed sorrow and postponed justice. My late wife, Maria, documented that Mrs. Blackwood's entire presidency is founded on fabricated elections. For 3 years, she has possessed no legal authority. Every fine, every policy, every decision, all of it is entirely illegitimate. The room erupted like a circuit breaker that finally trips after years of being dangerously overloaded. Residents who had paid thousands in bogus fines now understood they had been wronged by someone who held no more power than any other homeowner. However, it was the evidence of electrical fraud that completely destroyed Cordelia's remaining composure. I went to the microphone with photographs that would have made any reputable electrician weep with professional indignation. The familiar scent of justice mixed with my own nervous energy as I prepared to present the technical proof that would permanently end Cordelia's criminal activities. Mrs. Blackwood has been pilfering electricity from every family in this community, I stated, displaying images of unlawful connections that breached every electrical regulation in the books. Industrial pottery kilns illicitly wired into our shared electrical infrastructure, with residents being charged for power they never consumed. The photos revealed hazardous wiring that put lives at risk, makeshift connections, manipulated meters, and industrial machinery consuming vast amounts of power while being passed off as community maintenance costs. During my electrical safety training, my father had impressed upon me that such infractions were not merely theft, they were potential acts of manslaughter waiting to occur. The total electrical theft amounts to $89,000 over 6 years. I went on, my voice gaining strength with each damning detail. Plus, there was systematic meter fraud that affected 847 families. Federal investigators categorized this as a violation of interstate commerce, which carries mandatory prison terms. It was at that moment that Cordelia's meticulously crafted demeanor finally shattered like overloaded electrical machinery. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked, jumping to her feet with the frantic desperation of someone watching their world disintegrate in real time. I brought value. I upheld standards. I created a successful business while all of you bickered over trivial infractions. The room became quiet, save for the whirring of camera motors and the steady hum of recording devices capturing every self-incriminating utterance for the record. "Ma'am," I said, with the composed authority of someone who had finally resolved a complex electrical issue, You did not create a business. You constructed a criminal operation with stolen funds and pilfered electricity. But Cordelia was beyond the reach of reason, her desperation erupting like sparks from faulty wiring. I worked harder than any of you. While you were complaining about dues, I was generating revenue, creating opportunities, and building something substantial. With money you stole from 847 families, Sage interjected from the front row, her 17-year-old voice slicing through the chaos with devastating precision. The Federal Observer stood up slowly, his presence commanding the complete focus of everyone in the crowded room. Mrs. Blackwood, I am Agent Patterson of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I strongly recommend that you cease speaking immediately. Cordelia surveyed the room, at last seeing 274 faces gazing at her with expressions that varied from revulsion to compassion. There were no allies, no supporters, and no escape routes left in any direction. What is it you people want from me?" she murmured, her voice faltering under the pressure of total exposure and unavoidable repercussions. I returned to the microphone, feeling the profound satisfaction of an electrical current flowing exactly as it should after years of dangerous short circuits. "We want every single stolen dollar returned to the families you defrauded," I declared, my voice carrying the weight of an entire community's sentiment. Complete restitution, a public confession, an immediate resignation, and full cooperation with the federal prosecution. The silence hung in the air like a live wire awaiting connection, broken only by the soft clicks of cameras recording the moment when criminal autocracy finally met democratic justice. "Mrs. Blackwood," I stated, taking out my phone and starting a countdown timer for all to see. "You have precisely 60 seconds to decide between a confession and federal prison." The timer began to tick in the utter stillness of 274 people observing justice arrive, like an electrical current making its final connection. Tick, tick, tick. Justice had finally reached Pinehurst Estates, and the clock was ticking. The timer reached zero in a profound silence that felt as tense as a live wire about to make contact. Cordelia remained motionless, her designer suit now damp with perspiration, her meticulously crafted image fracturing like overloaded electrical insulation. The filled community center held its breath as cameras recorded the precise instant when autocracy was forced to choose between admitting guilt and facing utter ruin. She began, her voice barely a whisper above the whir of recording devices and the collective pulse of 274 people awaiting justice. "I might have made some substantial accounting mistakes. Could you speak up, please?" Mrs. Martinez requested, with the firm demeanor of someone who had long awaited this moment. "Every family here is entitled to hear this distinctly." Cordelia's posture sagged, as if the very framework of her being had collapsed. "I used funds from HOA accounts for my pottery business," she confessed, her voice gaining clarity as the admission seemingly unburdened her. "I made unauthorized electrical modifications to power my machinery. I falsified signatures on board documents. I billed residents for electricity they did not consume." The confession was not exhaustive, but it was sufficient. Agent Patterson gave a slight nod, signaling that the wheels of justice were officially in motion, while residents absorbed the confirmation of crimes they had long suspected. 20 minutes later, Cordelia was signing restitution papers, a process witnessed by federal agents and televised live across 3 states. Full repayment of $216,000, including fines, an immediate resignation, and complete collaboration with the continuing investigations. The criminal operation was formally over. 6 months on, the change was as dramatic as a neighborhood that had been completely rewired. Cordelia's large house was sold off to pay for the victim restitution, returning the stolen funds to every family that had been wronged. Her pottery machinery was auctioned off by federal authorities, and the money was used to create a community legal aid fund. The area where her illegal kills once stood is now a flourishing community garden, where children are learning about horticulture instead of growing up under a criminal regime. Mrs. Hendricks emerged as the trustworthy, skilled leader our community had so desperately needed. Financial statements were posted online each month with full transparency. The violation process now includes warnings before any fines are issued and a guaranteed right to appeal. Property values rose due to real enhancements rather than deceptive practices, and new families began to choose Pinehurst Estates because of its reputation for ethical leadership. My electrician business grew far beyond what I had ever thought possible. News of the man who had brought down an HOA tyrant with her own evidence spread, attracting clients from adjacent counties who valued someone prepared to challenge corruption. I began giving classes on electrical safety for homeowners at the local college, disseminating information that helps families identify utility fraud before it can ruin them financially. The most rewarding change was seeing Sage thrive at State University, where she is studying renewable energy engineering with the dedication of someone who has witnessed how electrical systems can be used for either good or ill. Her summer internship with utility fraud investigators solidified her decision to focus on grid security and sustainable power solutions that are immune to criminal manipulation. Our story, How One Dad Took Down an HOA Tyrant, went viral, sparking similar inquiries in numerous communities across the country. The state legislature enacted sweeping HOA reforms that mandate yearly audits and protect homeowners' rights. I provided testimony at the state capitol on how to prevent future victims, sharing insights from our unexpected masterclass in grassroots criminal investigation. Federal prosecutors now use our case as a training model for detecting utility fraud, and 3 other neighborhoods have successfully brought their own corrupt HOA operations to light using our investigative techniques. Millions of dollars have been returned to families who believe they had no options against methodical theft masked as community administration. The scholarship fund we established with the recovered embezzled money carries on Maria Morgan's legacy of truth and justice. The Maria Morgan Memorial Scholarship aids students in ethics, law, or public service, with Sage participating on the selection committee during her college holidays to ensure Maria's commitment to documentation and accountability continues to inspire the next generation. 9 months after Cordelia's public confession, I went to Sarah's grave to tell her about our daughter's achievements and our community's recovery. "She's going to make a real difference in the world, my love," I said to the headstone where my wife's memory is preserved. "She's already planning to run for city council after she graduates. She'll probably end up rewiring democracy itself." The experience showed me that protecting one's family sometimes requires engaging in conflicts one would rather not. But confronting bullies is the only way to stop them from harming others. True leadership is about safeguarding the community, even when it is hard, complicated, and comes at a personal price. Cordelia relocated to another part of the country after making full restitution, found work as a bookkeeper, and has maintained a much quieter existence. Last Christmas, she sent an anonymous card that simply read, "Thank you for teaching me what I needed to learn." Harold saw her in a supermarket looking genuinely more content, as if the weight of her deceptions had finally been lifted. Today, Pinehurst Estates stands as an exemplar of honest HOA management, drawing in residents who prioritize transparency and democratic involvement. Our yearly community festival honors civic participation and serves as a reminder that democracy demands unwavering vigilance from those who are willing to pose difficult questions about power and responsibility. Last week, while addressing the National HOA Conference, I imparted the most crucial lesson from our experience. Bullies depend on good people remaining isolated and quiet. But when communities come together for the truth and insist on accountability, no criminal operation can withstand the collective force of evidence, democracy, and neighbors who refuse to be oppressed. Justice is not about vengeance. It is about shielding future victims and showing criminals that consequences are certain when communities unite. Tonight, Sage and I are teaching electrical safety to neighborhood children in my workshop, enveloped by the familiar scent of sawdust and the sound of young voices asking insightful questions about how power truly functions. She is designing solar panel systems that could make our entire community self-sufficient in energy. Her textbooks are laid out on the same workbench where we once assembled the case that toppled a criminal empire. "Dad, would you like to help me plan a neighborhood microgrid system?" she asks, her eyes shining with the innovation and passion for justice that would have filled her mother with pride. "I'm always ready to learn something new, kid," I answer, feeling the profound contentment of circuits completed and communities restored. Outside, Pinehurst Estates is aglow with the warm light from homes where families reside without fear, where democracy functions as intended, and where one electrician's struggle became a victory for everyone over corruption masquerading as community service. Justice is like electricity. It takes the path of least resistance, but once the circuit is complete, nothing can prevent it from reaching its proper destination.